The night is quiet, soft with the hush of river breeze drifting through open windows. Along the edge of the Hudson, the waters glide smoothly, reflecting the sleepy glow of lamps along the shoreline. A train hums in the distance, its rhythm steady and low, while ships dock gently at the harbors, their iron hulls creaking softly as they rest. New York breathes in a slow, peaceful cadence. The city, in the summer of 1916, is full of stillness, unaware of the deep undercurrent slowly stirring beneath its surface. Across the harbor, on a small spit of land known as Black Tom Island, wooden piers and storage sheds stand quietly in the dark. Stacked high in orderly rows are crates of ammunition, boxes of rifles, and metal shells, sleeping in silence under the watchful eye of the moon. Everything appears peaceful, a night like many others, heavy with the warmth of midsummer and the promise of undisturbed dreams. But something unusual is taking place beneath this calm. Quiet movements, footsteps muffled in the shadows, figures walking slowly, deliberately, among the crates. These aren't dock workers or night watchmen. And though the city still sleeps, something is about to unfold, something nearly forgotten by time, yet significant enough to echo through history. A moment when, in the heart of a neutral America, war made its presence felt through a sudden and unseen hand. Tonight's journey carries us gently into this hidden corner of the past, into the secret German attack on New York in 1916, a story softly tucked into the folds of World War I. We'll drift through quiet streets, peer into the workings of a busy harbor, and follow the careful steps of espionage in a world still wrapped in the illusion of safety. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, places, and ideas. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, the wonders of science, fascinating inventions, inspiring famous figures, music history, and even calm explorations around the world. No matter where your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we're going to take a quiet walk back to 1916 to uncover the story of the Black Tom explosion, a secret act of sabotage that brought the tremble of war to American soil in the most unexpected of ways. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, settle in. Let the river breeze guide you. And let's begin. New York in 1916 moved to a rhythm all its own, a blend of quiet confidence and forward motion, gently humming beneath the surface of a city that never truly slept. The skyline, still modest by future standards, stretched gently skyward with towers of limestone and brick. Horse-drawn carts shared the streets with early automobiles, and the soft jangle of streetcars echoed along cobbled roads. There was industry, there was commerce, but above all, there was a calm sense of normalcy. The city's neighborhoods stirred with quiet purpose. In the early mornings, the scent of fresh bread wafted from bakeries tucked into corners of Little Italy. Children skipped along sidewalks in the Lower East Side, their laughter rising like birdsong in the narrow alleyways. The harbor bustled without frenzy, longshoremen moving crates in practiced rhythm, ferries drifting smoothly across the river, their wake spreading in slow arcs toward the shore. At night, the city dimmed slightly, like a lantern turned low. Gaslights flickered gently along the avenues, and jazz trickled from the open windows of upper-floor apartments. Families gathered around dinner tables. Couples strolled beneath the glow of storefronts. There was tension in the world, but here in New York, it was still held at arm's length, softened by distance and the comforting belief that the ocean was wide enough to keep danger away. Yet, far beyond the stillness of the city, the world was aflame. Across the Atlantic, Europe was locked in the third year of a war unlike any it had seen before. Trenches wound through the countryside, and the very shape of warfare had changed. New inventions, tanks, machine guns, and chemical weapons brought a cold and unfamiliar silence to once bustling fields and forests. In France, in Belgium, in the smoky battlefields of the Western Front, the nights were anything but peaceful. And while the United States maintained a delicate neutrality, it could not remain untouched. American industries were thriving from the war effort, supplying goods, munitions, and raw materials as quiet supporters of the Allied powers. Ships loaded in New York's harbors carried their cargo toward distant nations, and a growing entanglement that would eventually draw the country into the conflict. Still, in the summer of 1916, most New Yorkers lived their days with a sense of calm. News of battles reached them through newspapers and whispers, but these were distant stories, half a world away. The Statue of Liberty still welcomed new arrivals with her torch held high, and immigrants continued to arrive with hopes for work, safety, and freedom. The air was filled with a sense of promise, gently overlaying the simmering reality of a world on edge. In quiet offices and tucked-away corners, though, another world was beginning to take shape, a shadowed world of secrets, maps, and quiet intentions. German intelligence had begun to move silently through American cities. As New York exhaled in peace, something far more deliberate had begun to stir beneath the surface. Neutrality, for the United States in 1916, was a careful balancing act, one maintained with quiet restraint. While war raged across the Atlantic, the American government, led by President Woodrow Wilson, chose a path of cautious distance. The nation's official stance was clear: peace, diplomacy, and the hope that reason might still prevail in a world torn by violence. Yet beneath the surface, that neutrality wavered, its edges softened by economic ties, public sentiment, and the faint pull of future decisions. President Wilson spoke often of staying out of the European conflict. His words were measured, thoughtful, and calm, appealing to both idealism and practicality. Many Americans shared his sentiment. They wanted to remain apart from the destruction overseas, to shield their families from the distant storm. Across the country, there was a prevailing wish to focus inward, on work, on growth, on life at home. It was a time of invention, of industry, and of new possibilities. Neutrality in principle was not the same as neutrality in practice. By 1916, the United States had become a quiet but essential supplier of weapons and materials to the Allied powers, particularly Britain and France. Cargo ships left ports like New York and Baltimore laden with ammunition, uniforms, foodstuffs, and machinery, their holds filled with the weight of war. Factories worked around the clock, their machinery echoing through cities and towns, producing instruments of global conflict. This growing trade was not lost on Germany. To them, American neutrality had become a veil, one that concealed a growing favoritism toward their enemies. German officials, reading the shipping manifests and watching the harbor traffic, began to see the United States as a silent participant in the war effort. And while the German military could not yet confront America directly, its intelligence services took a different path, one defined by subtlety and stealth. In cities like New York, German agents worked quietly, moving through the streets with practiced ease. They rented apartments, ran small businesses, and met in hushed tones in public places. Their goal was simple but delicate: to disrupt the flow of supplies to the Allies. Sabotage became their chosen method, quiet, targeted, and carefully concealed. In a land that had not yet gone to war, these actions moved almost unnoticed, blending into the rhythm of everyday life. Public opinion, too, was in flux. While many Americans favored peace, others felt the pull of loyalty to ancestral homelands or moral support for the war's victims. Debates unfolded gently in newspapers and drawing rooms, on porches and in cafes. Should the U.S. become involved? Was neutrality honorable or naive? These questions lingered quietly, unanswered but growing in weight. And so, America remained at peace, officially, outwardly, and for a time, securely. But it was a fragile peace, resting gently atop layers of complexity. Like a thin sheet of ice, it shimmered in the light while cracks formed slowly beneath. No alarms had been sounded. No declarations had been made. But in the shadows, movements had begun. Ones that would, in time, rattle that neutrality with a single, distant blast. Just across the harbor from Manhattan, resting quietly in the waters of Jersey City, was a slender peninsula known as Black Tom Island. It wasn't an island in the true sense, but rather a small spit of land connected by rail and pier, cradled by the calm waters of Upper New York Bay. To most passers-by, it looked unremarkable, a cluster of warehouses, boxcars, and storage sheds, with plumes of smoke rising gently from freight engines, and the occasional sound of a distant whistle echoing through the early morning haze. Black Tom was far more than an ordinary rail yard. It was a central hub in America's munitions trade, a bustling depot where vast quantities of arms and explosives were stockpiled, sorted, and shipped. By 1916, as the Great War consumed Europe, Black Tom had become one of the busiest and most crucial transfer points in the country. Its piers extended into the harbor like open arms, ready to load cargo ships with the instruments of war. Each day, trains arrived from across the nation, their cars filled with crates marked with stenciled warnings, explosives, ammunition, handle with care. The crates were moved with quiet efficiency by crews familiar with the delicate nature of their work. Longshoremen and warehouse clerks operated in a rhythm of practiced calm, aware of the weight of their task, but carrying it with silent professionalism. The air often carried the scent of oil and gunpowder, mingling with the salt of the bay and the distant smoke of the city skyline. Inside the warehouses, the contents were varied and vast. Shells for artillery, small arms cartridges, fuses, and even finished rifles were neatly stacked from floor to ceiling. Many of these shipments were destined for European battlefields, part of a supply chain that stretched from American steel mills and factories to the front lines in France and beyond. Each crate was a quiet link in a global chain, its significance easily overlooked amid the hum of industry. Despite the importance of its cargo, Black Tom was not heavily fortified. The site was operated by the Lehigh Valley Railroad and leased to the National Dock and Storage Company, whose staff handled the logistics. Security was minimal, a few watchmen, a handful of posted warnings, and the assumption that the facility's industrial appearance was deterrent enough. After all, the United States was not at war. And in that climate of assumed safety, vigilance was light, and procedures were steady but relaxed. In the late afternoons, as the sun dipped low and painted the harbor in tones of gold and rose, the depot would quiet. Workers went home, and the hum of the day gave way to the softer sounds of water lapping against pilings and seagulls circling above. The buildings, still filled with ton after ton of volatile cargo, stood in calm silence, their contents slumbering beneath locked doors and the cool night air. To the outside world, Black Tom was simply part of the scenery, a practical, industrious place among many. But to those who looked closer, and especially to those who knew what it held, it was something more. It was a silent artery in the vast body of wartime supply, and it was vulnerable through the gentle assumption that peace would hold, that the harbor would stay still, that what lay quietly inside would remain undisturbed. Black Tom stood as a symbol of America's industrial might, yet it was also quietly exposed through a tapestry of small oversights, each thread gently tugging at the edges of security. The depot's role in shipping war supplies was widely known in certain circles, but the scale of its vulnerability remained largely unspoken. It was a place of motion and routine, where familiarity bred a calm confidence that everything would go on just as it had before. The very design of the facility lent itself to risk. Crates of explosives were stored in open warehouses or left on rail cars waiting for the next outbound ship. Often, different types of munitions were stacked side by side, their labels visible, their contents known to those who worked there. Shipments came and went regularly, and with the urgency of transatlantic demand, corners were sometimes quietly rounded off in the name of speed. The workers at Black Tom did their jobs with diligence, but few were trained in security or surveillance. The watchmen patrolled with lanterns and quiet steps, more concerned with accidents than with sabotage. Access to the area was loosely controlled. With so many hands involved in the loading, storing, and sorting of cargo, it wasn't difficult for someone with a practiced gait and a forged paper to blend into the background. Everyone was busy. Everyone had a task. In the shuffle of industry, a new face was rarely questioned. The proximity to the city also posed risks. Jersey City was a place of movement, a living junction where trains, ships, and workers crossed paths in a continuous tide. German agents, already active in America, found the anonymity of urban life to be a useful veil. With enough observation and patience, they learned the schedules, the blind spots, the hours when the depot was least watched. They noted where the guards walked, when lights dimmed, and where the explosive materials sat unguarded for the night. At a deeper level, there was a kind of psychological vulnerability too, a widespread belief that sabotage was unlikely, even unthinkable, on American soil. The war was an ocean away. And though whispers of German operatives circulated through news columns and official memos, they were often softened by doubt or dismissed altogether. To act would have required breaking the spell of neutrality, and few were eager to admit that danger might already be inside the gate. Inspections were infrequent. Interagency communication was limited. The depot operated more like a business than a fortress, efficient, productive, but unaware of just how desirable and how fragile it had quietly become. And so, day after day, under open skies and in full view of the harbor, thousands of pounds of explosives came to rest, unattended through the night, exposed to the quiet curiosity of those who knew just where to look. Nothing yet had disturbed the peace. But the calmness of Black Tom, the quiet assurance that everything would continue undisturbed, was beginning to shift. Something was coming. And the island, for all its ordinariness, would soon become the center of a story that began with the quiet lifting of a latch in the dark. In the quiet spaces between New York's crowded sidewalks and the steady hum of its harbor, another kind of movement was unfolding, one that left no obvious trace, yet gently shaped the currents beneath the city's calm surface. German intelligence agents, trained in subtlety and patience, had begun to build a quiet network on American soil. A web of watchers, listeners, and messengers, men who blended in easily, whose work was invisible to all but the most attentive eyes. By 1916, the Imperial German government had accepted that the United States, though officially neutral, had become a crucial lifeline to the Allied forces. Trains, ships, and warehouses filled with American-made supplies were feeding the war effort overseas. Unable to stop these shipments through diplomatic pressure, Germany turned instead to covert disruption. Sabotage would become their tool, and New York, with its sprawling ports and bustling railways, the center of their quiet campaign. The men selected for these missions came from varied backgrounds. Some were naturalized citizens, others were diplomats or businessmen. They moved through hotel lobbies, train stations, and busy shipping yards, always watching, always noting the smallest of details. Many had day jobs that offered a convenient cover: clerks, dock workers, mechanics, professions that placed them near cargo and infrastructure, where information passed quietly and unnoticed. At the heart of this network was Franz von Rintelen, a suave and calculating figure who operated under a false Swiss identity. He worked with influence, spreading funds, forging documents, and directing sabotage efforts from behind the scenes. He didn't shout commands. He wrote them in careful letters or whispered them in the back rooms of cafes. His presence was soft, almost invisible, yet his reach extended across ports, factories, and rail lines from coast to coast. Sabotage, as practiced by these agents, was designed to be quiet and hard to trace. Timed incendiary devices were crafted to ignite after cargo had left the dock, ensuring that fires would seem accidental. These small tools of disruption were slipped gently into crates, tucked beneath lids, or wedged between bundles of explosives, so slight in size, yet capable of devastating effect. They were known as cigar bombs, shaped like thin tubes, their delayed fuses calibrated to avoid suspicion. The agents relied on unwitting helpers, workers hired to move freight or inspect rail cars, people who noticed little and asked even less. Occasionally, money would change hands. But more often, it was simply a matter of knowing when and where to appear, and what questions not to ask. In a city as busy as New York, anonymity was easy to maintain, especially when the watchers chose to walk slowly, to speak rarely, and to act with perfect patience. And so, as the days passed and the munitions piled higher at Black Tom and other depots, the saboteurs quietly positioned themselves. They kept their distance. They observed the habits of guards, the arrival of shipments, the movement of freight. Nothing about their work made a sound. No alarms were triggered. No warnings were given. It was a different kind of warfare, one that left no battle scars, no uniforms, no noise. Just the slow accumulation of knowledge, the quiet sharpening of intent, and the careful waiting for the right moment to act. By the early summer of 1916, the stage had been set with quiet precision. The agents involved in the German sabotage network had spent months mapping the routines at Black Tom, taking careful note of guard rotations, shipping schedules, and the layout of the warehouses. Every detail had been absorbed slowly, like ink spreading gently across paper. Now, in the warm and hazy evenings of July, the moment to act was approaching, with the still confidence of a plan long nurtured in silence. Communication among the saboteurs remained deliberately sparse. Messages were shared through coded letters, brief, face-to-face exchanges in streetcars, or discreet notes slipped across tavern tables. Franz von Rintelen had by this point returned to Europe, his role passed to others still embedded within the city. Among them were individuals working under assumed names, supported by a network of sympathizers, informants, and quietly cooperative port workers. None made themselves known. All remained a part of the city's great anonymity. The final days before the sabotage felt no different than any others. Trains arrived at Black Tom, their wheels clicking softly along the rails. Crates filled with explosives were unloaded and left in temporary storage on the piers. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed wood. The heat of the season had thickened, wrapping the harbor in a heavy stillness that hung over the water and the warehouses alike. The depot itself was unusually full. Delays in shipping had led to a backlog, and more than 2 million pounds of ammunition, shells, black powder, and small arms cartridges were being stored in close quarters. No one knew the full weight of what sat there. The tally was scattered across shipping manifests, invoices, and rail car logs. Yet the saboteurs knew. They had followed the cargo's movement, watched its arrival, and marked its position with patient eyes. On the evening of July 29th, they moved into place. The timing had been chosen with care, just past nightfall, when most workers had gone home and only a handful of watchmen remained. The chosen method was subtle. Timed incendiary devices, likely shaped from small tubes and packed with slow-burning chemicals, were placed within key shipments. Once ignited, they would smolder quietly for hours, unseen, generating heat until reaching the point of combustion. The agents left as quietly as they had arrived, disappearing into the city's streets. No alarms were triggered. No doors were broken. The island returned to its gentle silence, unaware of what had been set in motion. The bay lapped softly at the pilings. The trains had ceased their clattering. Lights glowed faintly from nearby buildings. All was calm. And so, the fuse was lit with the softest gesture. A match struck in shadow. A device hidden in wood. A plan completed with the grace of a hand slipping into a pocket. The countdown had begun, invisible and unstoppable, as the city slept in perfect peace. The night of July 29th, 1916, settled gently over the harbor with a warmth that softened the edges of the world. The air was thick with summer heat, yet still enough to let the quiet settle in. Across the water, the lights of Manhattan twinkled softly, like stars fallen to earth, while Black Tom Island rested in near silence, its warehouses filled, its workday complete, and its watchmen making quiet rounds under the glow of gas lanterns. The depot, crowded with shipments waiting for departure, stood undisturbed. The crates, so carefully stacked, gave no indication of what waited inside. Shells lay beside small arms ammunition, packed neatly in pine and straw, all resting under the wide arc of a moonlit sky. The rails, still warm from the day's activity, stretched empty across the yard. Even the machinery had gone quiet. The switch engines, the cranes, the wheelbarrows, all stilled in the gentle hush of nighttime. The few men left on duty passed the hours with calm routine. One or two sat near the piers, watching the tide lap gently against the wooden foundations. Others walked slow circles around the yard, lanterns swinging softly in their hands. There was no sense of urgency, no indication that anything was out of place. The weight of the day had passed, and the stillness of night had returned. Above the depot, the sky remained clear. A faint haze hung low over the water, carrying with it the scent of salt, oil, and hot wood. From the distance, the occasional echo of a foghorn rolled in, low, resonant, and comforting. The harbor, so often a place of clatter and commotion, had entered its most peaceful hour. Inside one of the storage buildings, deep among the stacks, a faint sound might have been heard. A small hiss, perhaps, or the tiniest crackle of something warming far too slowly to be noticed. The incendiary devices, buried within wooden crates, had begun their silent work. They gave no smoke, no light, only the faintest exhalation of chemical reaction, building in heat with the patience of something inevitable. Still, all around remained quiet. The city beyond slept. Ferry docks emptied. Streetcars slowed. Lights dimmed in apartment windows as families settled into sleep. The same lull extended to the waterside, where the gentle current rolled past tugboats moored for the night. Black Tom itself gave no sign, no flicker, no flash, no warning. And so the hours passed, one blending softly into the next. Just another summer night. Just another shipment waiting for dawn. Yet in that calm, something had already changed. The balance, once stable, now leaned imperceptibly toward disruption. No one knew it yet. The guards still walked. The river still moved. The moon still watched. But deep within the stacked silence of a warehouse at Black Tom, the night was already slipping into history, quietly, slowly, and without a single sound. It began just past 2 a.m., when most of the city had drifted into its deepest sleep. The waters around Black Tom lay still, with only a soft ripple now and then breaking the surface. The harbor breathed gently, and even the night air seemed to pause. Then, from within the stacks of munitions resting on the docks, came a sudden flash. A quiet moment passed, just long enough to register stillness, and then a deep, rolling explosion cracked through the silence like a distant thunderclap brought startlingly near. The sound, though sudden, didn't come with panic. It arrived like an echo from far away, muffled by the night, its force cloaked by distance. Windows trembled. Dishes rattled in kitchen cabinets. In Jersey City, people stirred in their beds, uncertain whether what they heard was real or merely part of a dream. A pulse of orange light glowed briefly at the distance, just enough to silhouette the piers and faintly illuminate the rooftops. Then, only minutes later, the second explosion came, stronger, deeper, and filled with a strange resonance that seemed to hang in the air. This was the true eruption. In an instant, it shattered glass across lower Manhattan, sent tremors up through steel girders and concrete floors, and lifted the night into a moment of brilliance and sound. The sky over Black Tom glowed red as fire leapt from the piers and warehouses, twisting into the air in slow, deliberate curls. The force of the blast was felt for miles. In Ellis Island, the shockwave blew open doors and cracked the walls of the immigrant station. At the foot of the Statue of Liberty, windows shattered in her pedestal, and delicate fittings came loose inside the great monument. The island itself shook, as if the earth had taken a deep breath and then released it with a long, heavy sigh. In Manhattan, across the Hudson, thousands of residents awoke to the sounds of glass breaking, picture frames falling, and distant sirens starting to wail. Children clutched blankets. Adults rose and stood at their windows, searching for answers in the glowing horizon. But the flames at Black Tom offered no explanation, only light, flickering across the water like a strange dawn, a fire that crackled and hissed where peace had once rested. On the island, chaos unfolded in slow motion. Boxcars burned with a low roar, their metal sides curling inward. Crates erupted in chains of fire, their contents igniting in rhythm, like fireworks slowly blooming across the yard. The pier crumbled in places, sending planks and debris into the water, where they floated quietly amid the steam and ash. Those few who had been on duty escaped with their lives, but the shock lingered long after the fire died down. The destruction was deeply felt. The crater left by the blast would remain, not just in the soil and the piers, but in memory, etched into the quiet minds of a city that had, for a single night, felt the tremble of distant war touch its shores. And then, slowly, the fire began to fade. The glow softened. The ash settled. Water lapped once again against the island's edge, darkened now by soot and scorched timber. The night returned, changed but calm. The silence, once broken, began to stitch itself back together. Morning arrived slowly over New York Harbor, the first light stretching gently across a skyline still wrapped in haze. The sun rose to a different quiet, one filled with ash, with the scent of scorched timber, and with the soft, drifting echoes of what had passed just hours before. The city had not yet found words for what had happened, but it had already begun to feel the shape of it. In Jersey City, residents stepped onto their porches and sidewalks, looking toward the water with cautious eyes. A faint plume still drifted above the harbor, soft and gray, trailing upward from where Black Tom Island once buzzed with movement. Now the land was marked by a wide crater, scorched rails, and twisted fragments of buildings that had collapsed in on themselves. Boats moved carefully through the harbor, their wakes slow and deliberate. Ferry captains steered around debris, much of it still floating, splintered wood, lengths of metal, charred paper that fluttered like leaves on the water. The Statue of Liberty, so often a symbol of welcome and certainty, stood motionless in the distance, her pedestal cracked, the arm that held her torch unharmed, but forever connected now to the memory of the blast. In Lower Manhattan, shopkeepers swept broken glass from their storefronts. Cracks spidered across windows, and the sounds of hammering and brushing replaced the usual morning chatter. Conversations were hushed, filled with wonder rather than fear. There had been an explosion, yes, but no one quite knew how or why. Some blamed a barge fire. Others spoke of accidents with powder or stray sparks. A few, speaking more softly, wondered if it had been something more. At the immigration station on Ellis Island, workers moved carefully through the damaged halls. The night's shock had unsettled more than walls. It had shaken nerves, disturbed dreams, and left those newly arrived on American soil feeling unsteady in their welcome. But the staff worked with calm purpose, tending to the damage, restoring routine, and guiding those who had witnessed the blast back into a space of quiet reassurance. Newspapers began to print their first headlines. "Terrific explosion rocks harbor," some read. Others simply used the word mystery. Journalists described the scene as best they could, yet the cause remained uncertain. It would take time before any understanding emerged, time and patience and investigation. Throughout the city, the day unfolded with subdued energy. Streetcars ran. Children played, though their games were filled with new questions. Offices opened. Meals were served. But the memory of the night lingered like the haze above the water. It was a presence in the air, in the tone of conversations, in the cautious glances toward the skyline. Black Tom, once unnoticed by many, had become a silent monument through the force of what had occurred. And as the city moved forward, brushing away the soot and piecing together the hours before dawn, it carried with it a new awareness, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a reminder that even in peace, history can whisper, and sometimes, briefly, it raises its voice. In the quiet days that followed the explosion, a slow and careful search began. Not just through the ruins of Black Tom Island, but through papers, witness accounts, and the soft-spoken suspicions of those who sensed that what had happened was no accident. There were no dramatic arrests, no confessions or letters left behind. Only the silence of scorched earth and the delicate trail of clues scattered through the haze. Investigators moved cautiously through the site, stepping over warped rails and picking their way around craters where warehouses once stood. The air still carried the scent of burned cordite and splintered pine. Among the debris, fragments of timing devices and metal tubing were found, small things, almost unnoticeable. To the trained eye, they hinted at something deliberate, something placed with care. Government agencies, still young in the art of espionage, began to piece together what they could. Detectives from the Bureau of Investigation, the forerunner to the FBI, worked alongside local police and railroad officials, tracing cargo manifests, interviewing workers, and revisiting reports of strange sightings in the days leading up to the blast. They spoke with guards, dock hands, and warehouse clerks, listening for anything that might have seemed out of place, however small. Patterns began to emerge. There had been unfamiliar faces, unusual behavior, crates that were touched by hands not listed on any log. But none of it led to a name, a face, or an arrest. It was a mystery made of shadows, where every step seemed to fade into another layer of uncertainty. And all the while, the city continued to move, its daily rhythms returning with slow confidence. Whispers of German involvement began to surface in quiet circles. Some officials suspected sabotage. Others hesitated, uncertain of what warlike language might stir in a nation still neutral. President Wilson's administration was cautious, deliberate in its approach, unwilling to leap to conclusions without evidence. The idea of enemy agents operating within the country's borders was deeply unsettling, and many were not yet ready to accept it aloud. Years would pass before a full picture took shape. It wasn't until after the war had ended and broader investigations unfolded that the truth became clearer. Through a combination of confessions, diplomatic documents, and international inquiries, it became widely accepted that the Black Tom explosion had been the result of a covert German operation carried out by agents working in secrecy, using tools of silence and precision. The realization came slowly, like fog lifting from the harbor. It brought a quiet recognition that the lines between war and peace had been far more porous than they had seemed. That even in a city untouched by battle, the currents of global conflict had quietly swept through. In time, reparations were sought and paid. Names were added to records. the story of Black Tom entered the folds of historical memory. But in those early days, amid the soft scrape of brooms on sidewalks and the gentle turning of headlines, it was still a mystery, one unfolding with the steady patience of truth emerging from silence. As the years slipped quietly forward, the story of the Black Tom explosion began to fade from the city's conversations. New events took its place in the headlines. The war overseas deepened and eventually ended, and the world turned to recovery, remembrance, and rebuilding. In time, the crater at Black Tom was filled in. The debris was cleared. New structures rose, and the outlines of the explosion slowly disappeared beneath fresh concrete and growing grass. The island itself, once a bustling depot, was absorbed into the expanding landscape of Liberty State Park. Trees were planted. Walking paths were drawn. Visitors arrived, strolling through fields that now whispered only the faintest echo of the night they had once lit with fire. There were no great memorials. No crowds gathered to mark the anniversary. The memory of what had happened became quiet, softly folded into the layers of local history. For many, the Black Tom explosion was never fully known. It remained a name, vaguely remembered, or a detail noted in passing on plaques or within textbooks. The event didn't define a generation or spark national change in the moment it occurred. And yet, its significance lingered in the quiet reshaping of how a nation viewed its safety and its place in the world. The crater, at its deepest point, had been nearly 30 feet wide. It left more than just a hole in the ground. It left a gentle reminder that even cities built on progress and promise are not beyond the touch of unseen conflict. That even in times of peace, the reach of distant unrest can arrive quietly, on the tide, in the night. In later years, researchers and historians would revisit the story, piecing together the events from dusty archives and declassified files. They would speak of sabotage, of espionage, of the subtle influence of war on neutral ground. And slowly, Black Tom found its place in the broader story of America's journey into the modern era, a small event with a wide echo, a soft voice amid the louder moments of history. A modest stone plaque now marks the spot, nestled in the quiet park that surrounds it. It doesn't demand attention. It offers a gentle nudge to remember, to pause, to consider what lies beneath the surface of the peaceful spaces we walk each day. In that stillness, the story endures, through the quiet presence of a place that once changed, and a city that, unknowingly, bore witness to one of the first echoes of a global conflict that had only just begun to reach its shores. Over time, as the Black Tom explosion slipped further into the soft folds of history, its quiet legacy began to take root. It planted a subtle awareness, one that grew slowly over years, shaping how a nation would come to view its own vulnerability and the invisible paths through which conflict can travel. The idea that foreign agents had carried out sabotage on American soil unsettled many with a quiet reevaluation of assumptions. Before Black Tom, the United States had imagined itself distant from war, buffered by oceans, shielded by neutrality, protected by its isolation. After Black Tom, those illusions were softened. There was now a recognition that conflict could arrive quietly, That intent could cross borders without banners or ships. As the First World War ended and new eras began, the explosion remained a touchstone for those in government, intelligence, and security. Slowly, systems of counterintelligence evolved. Agencies began to coordinate more closely, sharing observations, watching not just for visible threats, but for those that moved beneath the surface. The lessons of Black Tom helped shape the early character of the FBI, and later, other institutions designed to guard against unseen disruption. These changes unfolded gently, like layers being added to a blueprint, one thoughtful step after another. And in this way, the story of sabotage led not just to awareness, but to preparedness. The nation turned toward reflection, learning how to safeguard peace through quiet vigilance. In education, the event remained mostly in the background, mentioned occasionally in discussions of espionage or early 20th century history. But for those who study the slow movements of cause and effect, Black Tom became an example of how small, nearly forgotten moments can ripple outward, shaping the way a country thinks and responds. In recent years, with the rise of historical interest and archival access, the story has gently resurfaced. A reminder that even in peace, there are stories hidden just beneath the still surface of time. That history is not only made in grand halls and battlefield speeches, but also in quiet sabotage, unnoticed shifts, and soft echoes that stretch forward in subtle lines. Visitors to Liberty State Park today may pass the site without knowing what once happened there. Children play in fields where boxcars once stood. Joggers follow paths laid over old rail lines. And nearby, a simple plaque stands by the water's edge, offering a few words about that night long ago, when the sky lit up, the harbor shook, and history whispered something new into the ears of a sleeping city. Now, as the story of Black Tom quietly settles behind us, we return to the stillness of the harbor, to the soft lapping of water against stone, and the faint glimmer of moonlight on a summer night. The echoes of the explosion have long faded, and the landscape, once marked by ash and fire, rests again in gentle peace. The island, now part of the parkland, no longer trembles. It simply listens as the breeze moves through trees that were planted long after the night the sky turned red. The city around it has grown, risen higher, and moved forward, as cities do. But somewhere beneath its foundations, the memory lingers with the quiet presence of something once felt and now gently understood. Black Tom is no longer a depot. It is a space of quiet reflection, where grass grows over soil that once held flame, and where silence has reclaimed the place where war once reached out softly in the dark. And so we close this evening's journey with the comfort of stillness restored. The river glides on, calm and untroubled. The skyline sleeps beneath a soft cover of stars. In the distance, the Statue of Liberty continues to stand, her torch held high, in welcome and quiet resilience. We carry with us a sense of how history moves, slowly, subtly, like a current beneath the surface, and how even the most extraordinary moments often unfold in silence, noticed only when they've already passed. Tonight, we've wandered through one such moment, tucked quietly into time, and now gently folded away again. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.